Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Russia launches a combined missile and drone attack on Kyiv, killing at least 6 people, including a 6-year-old boy. The attack also wounded dozens and caused damage at 27 locations across 4 districts in the Ukrainian capital. Canada will recognise a Palestinian state in September, becoming the 3rd G7 nation to do so. Prime Minister Mark Carney stressed the move depends on democratic reforms and elections without Hamas. Israel's foreign ministry rejected the announcement, calling it a reward for the group. President Donald Trump announced a 15% tariff on South Korean imports as part of a full and complete trade deal. The agreement includes a $350 billion investment by Seoul and a 50% tax on South Korean steel and aluminium exports. 2 resolutions to block arms sales to Israel over civilian casualties in Gaza were rejected in the US Senate, despite gaining more support than earlier measures. The resolutions failed with votes of 73 to 24 and 70 to 27. US President Donald Trump has confirmed that he will attend the ASEAN summit in October, according to the Malaysian Prime Minister. Anwar made the announcement after a call with Trump. Chile has evacuated 1.4 million people from its coast following an 8.8 magnitude earthquake off Russia's coast and a Pacific tsunami alert. First tsunami waves have already hit the South American country, according to the Interior Minister. At least 48 Palestinians have been killed and dozens more wounded while waiting for food at a crossing in the Gaza Strip, according to a hospital that received the casualties. The violence came as the US Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff arrived in Israel for talks. The US has imposed sanctions on Brazilian Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes, who is handling the trial of former President Jair Bolsonaro. President Trump has also announced a 50% tariff on most Brazilian imports, including key sectors such as aircraft and energy. We start in Europe, where Russia has launched a combined missile and drone attack on Kyiv, killing at least 6 people, including a 6-year-old boy. Dozens more were also wounded and damage spread across 27 locations in 4 districts of the Ukrainian capital. Among the destroyed structures, residential buildings, schools and hospitals were damaged. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has posted a video showing the aftermath of the attack, including burning ruins and people trapped under the rubble. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha has called it a horrible morning as he shared images of devastated apartments. Russia denies targeting civilians, but the attacks have increased in recent months, impacting areas far from the front line. Meanwhile, the US has signaled frustration with Russian President Vladimir Putin, with President Trump shortening a deadline this week for peace talks. In addition, Russia claims to have captured the town of Chasiv Yar in eastern Ukraine, a strategic location that has been the site of months of intense fighting. We're now joined by Glenn Grant, who's an ex-advisor to the Ukrainian Defense Minister. He joins us live from Riga in Latvia. Thank you very much, and good morning, Glenn. Thank you for joining us. These attacks have obviously escalated in the coming in previous months, even with the backdrop of peace talks and not so frequent direct meetings between Ukrainian and Russian officials. Russia, of course, obviously continues to deny that it doesn't target civilians and doesn't target civilian infrastructure. What are your thoughts on Moscow's stance when it comes to that statement?
Well, I mean, clearly, it's nonsense because the results are there for everybody in the world to see, which is destroyed schools, destroyed hospitals, and attacks on civilian buildings, and this is part of the the war of terror that Moscow is actually using onto the Ukrainian people. I mean, I'm running out of things to say about this. It's every day. It just increases steadily, and it's going to get worse, not better.
Glenn, you say a war on terror. As we've just listed, we've seen schools destroyed, hospitals destroyed in the Ukrainian capital, not destroyed, apologies, damaged. What do you believe that Vladimir Putin's and his war advisors' aim is in targeting structures like this?
Oh, it is simply to get the Ukrainian people to capitulate and give in to Russia. I mean, that was the original aim. I'm beginning to think that there's also now, something almost of murderous hate, of destruction of the Ukrainian people. And this is, they can't do it on the front line. So doing it behind the front line is the only way that they can actually, create this level of sheer nastiness that is coming out of Russia at the moment.
Yes, of course, Glenn, and obviously this has happened after we saw Donald Trump and Ukraine's close ally of Keir Starmer in the United Kingdom meet. From that meeting, we saw Donald Trump then shorten his deadline from 50 days to 10 in regards to when these sanctions will be kicking in against Russia and its allies. If no a peace or movement is even made in regards to peace, how much of an impact will sanctions on Russia and its allies have on this conflict?
At the moment, I think limited. And I say that because Russia has turning itself now totally into a war economy. Not just war economy, but war system now. I mean, they're training children now to fight. They're stealing, 18-year-olds the moment they leave school and training them to fight and putting them towards the front line. So we're up against the whole of Russia now, ready to go to war with everybody that it wants to. Now, sanctions didn't work against North Korea, and they didn't work against Iran. So I can't see that they're going to work against Russia, that is supported by North Korea, Iran, and China.
Glenn, I don't know if you've spoken to anyone in Ukraine currently, but I was just wondering what the morale is in the country, especially as we've previously mentioned that attacks are increasing every single day. As you've said, this is almost a daily occurrence. What is the feeling in the country of Ukraine right now when it comes to this conflict?
It's completely stubborn resistance, But what is interesting, and a lot of people outside haven't actually grasped yet, is that there is a growing and increasing unhappiness with the Ukrainian government, with Zelensky's government, for not actually taking the measures that they need to take to win the war. The general feeling is that he goes out with a begging bowl, but inside the country he's just not taking the management steps that are required to bring the country to a war footing to fight Russia properly.
Yes, Glenn, thank you very much. You are staying with us to discuss further stories. For our next update, we move over to the Middle East, where multiple blasts were seen over Gaza early on Thursday morning as Israel's air and ground campaign continues. The strikes come after Palestinian authorities confirmed over 60,000 deaths due to the ongoing conflict. Meanwhile, in the US Senate, 2 resolutions to block arms sales to Israel were rejected. The measures aimed to halt $675 million in bomb and rifle shipments, but failed with broad bipartisan opposition. Critics of the sales continue to urge action to protect civilians in Gaza, citing mounting humanitarian concerns. We're once again joined by Glenn Grant to discuss this update from the Middle East. Glenn, obviously we hear news of humanitarian aid finally making it into the Gaza Strip. Critics are saying not enough. However, that does not distract us from the fact that this conflict is still very much active and going on. We saw 48 people killed, some reported waiting for aid within the past 24 hours. Can I just get your current brief thoughts on the state of this conflict and the IDF's military actions right now?
This is a nasty conflict. I mean, the IDF seem to be now out of control. Of course, what we can't actually tell is what the truth is. But there is no doubt that some of the things the IDF are doing are really beyond the pale, and Israel doesn't seem to be interested in any political solution until Hamas gives over those last bodies and hostages that they've got.
Yes, indeed. And what are your thoughts on the US Senate rejecting this arms blocking to Israel, put forward by Senator of Vermont, Bernie Sanders, overwhelming bipartisan majority in blocking continued arms sales to the Israeli government over mounting civilian deaths in the region. Do you think this was expected?
Yeah, at the stage we're at, yes, it is. I mean, it's very hard for people outside to understand this relationship between Israel and America. I mean, Israel is effectively, in American thinking, another state of America. But the fact that there is increasing numbers of people willing to vote against Israel says that there is a shift. It's slow, but there is a shift, and it's coming. And if Israel doesn't actually note this, then that shift could actually get faster and with more force behind it.
Yes, and obviously this comes as Canada is going to become the third G7 nation to recognize a Palestinian state, possibly if Israel doesn't push for a ceasefire harder, along with the UK and France, of course. What are your thoughts on Donald Trump and some of his closest allies turning against the Israeli agenda here?
Well, I mean, you know what Trump is like. I mean, he follows the last thing that has been given to him. So it's quite possible that he will turn at some stage. I mean, he's already made indications that he's deeply unhappy with this, but that deeply unhappiness hasn't actually turned into anything concrete yet. But I think Israel has got to understand that the signs are there, that things are not all following their views now, and they need to start moving back to political action quickly.
Glenn Grant, pleasure as always to have you on the program.
Thank you.
We now move over to the United States, where time is running short for governments to reach agreements with Washington to avoid tariff increases that the US president has threatened against dozens of economies. As the August 1st deadline for higher levies approaches, tensions between the US and Canada have escalated. This follows Canada's announcement that it intends to recognize a Palestinian state at the United Nations in September. US President Donald Trump said this development will make it very hard to reach a trade deal with Canada. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney has said that the recognition aims to preserve the possibility of a two-state solution. According to Carney, the move depends on the Palestinian Authority's commitment to governance reforms and plans to hold general elections in 2026, in which Hamas can play no part. Here's what the Canadian Prime Minister had to say.
Pour ces raisons, le Canada a l'intention de reconnaître l'État de la Palestine lors de la 80e session de l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies en septembre 2025. Cette intention repose sur la volonté de l'autorité palestinienne de mener des réformes essentielles, notamment la promesse de son président Mahmoud Abbas d'organiser des élections générales en 2026 et de ne pas militariser l'État palestinien. Le Canada va redoubler d'efforts pour appuyer une gouvernance forte en Palestine et contribuer à un avenir pacifique et promoteur pour son peuple. Nous fournissons aussi 10 millions de dollars de plus pour soutenir l'autorité palestinienne dans ses efforts de stabilisation et de gouvernance de la Cisjordanie. Nous travaillons avec nos alliés pour...
We're now joined by Dr. Ajay Dua, who's a senior economist and geopolitical expert, to discuss this in further detail. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Dua. This is deadline day, July the 31st, the day before August the 1st tariffs kick in. The majority of these deals, Dr. Dua, have been finalised, or some not finalised, but made in the past week. Which countries will be scrambling now to get deals which haven't yet so far?
India is one of them, though yesterday President has indicated that a certain duty would be levied on the Indian goods, because he's kind of said that India continues to have high tariffs, and he's castigated India's non-tariff barriers. That's one. This morning a deal was signed, I believe, with South Korea. Deal meaning unilateral announcement from President Trump that he would be levying 15% duty, the same as it's doing it for Japan. Another deal is, of course, for Canada, the subject we are just discussing. The Canada and the US have virtually integrated economies, and as much as 25% of the Canadian GDP is linked to the exports it makes to the United States. They have a treaty called the CUSMA, which Canada, US, and Mexico are partners. So far, the president has held back levying additional duties because of the most items are covered under CUSMA, but those which are not covered, he is threatened that he'll be imposing a 35% duty on those Canadian goods, and that includes copper, 50% on copper, 200% on pharma, and whole lot of other items which are not covered will be levied at 35%. The reason seems to be that Canada is not playing ball on the geopolitical front, as you just observed. The reason, the president wants to use trade as a political tool because his long-term ally, Mr. Bolsonaro, the previous president, is being questioned in Brazil. Hence, Brazil has to pay a duty on its exports. He's talked of a duty of 30-odd% on the aircrafts which Brazil exports. You know, they have a company called Embraer which has got the market in the passenger traffic industry. So similarly, at one point of time, if you recall, soon after the then Premier of Canada had called on him, Mr. Trudeau, he had referred to Canada as his 51st state, or the United States' 51st state. Yet, Canada is now ruled by a different party, and Mark Carney is a very experienced governor of Bank of England as well as Bank of Canada. He's done both these stints. And he is saying that he is not taking on President of US in any manner, except saying that I don't see a treaty happening with us in the next couple of days.
Yes, Dr. Dua.
Also, the deadline was the 1st of August.
Yes, Dr. Dua, thank you. You are staying with us to discuss further updates. US President Donald Trump said that the United States has done very little business with India and that Russia and the US do almost no business together. He expressed indifference towards India's dealings with Russia and said that he doesn't care about trade between the two economies. However, in an earlier Truth Social post on July the 30th, Trump talked about India's trade with Russia when announcing that the US would impose a 25% tariff on goods imported from India starting on August the 1st, aka tomorrow. Trump had said that India has always bought a vast majority of their military equipment and energy from Russia, which was not good. In response to the earlier Truth Social post, the Indian government said that it was studying the implications of Trump's announcement and remained dedicated to securing a fair trade deal. We're once again joined by Dr. Ajay Jua. Dr. Jua, how do you analyse this trade deal? How much impact is this really going to have on the Indian consumer and also, of course, the Indian economy in a broad sense?
Taking up the last question, or the last issue which you raised about the impact on the economy. Last time when Mr. Trump imposed 10% duty across the board, the Indian economy's rate of growth for the current year was scaled down from 6.5% to 6.2%. Now I think with this 25%, and I hope this 25% is inclusive of the 10% which was imposed earlier, and it is not over and above it, and it is not taking into account as yet the so-called penalty for India importing oil, crude oil from the US, from Russia, and the arms which he's talked about, which factually is not right. Yes, oil, about 35% now comes from Russia, but in the case of defense equipment, our dependence upon upon Russia has come down by half, from 72% to 36% in the 4 years between 2024. This is as per SIPRI, the Swedish institution which monitors all the arm flows between the countries, and the trade with the US has increased, the overall trade, and as of now, Mr. Trump makes a lot out of our merchandise surplus of about $40 billion with the US. But if you take into account the services, services to trade, to take into account the royalties which get paid to the US firms, as well as the armaments, the M&A defense equipment, the overall surplus is in the favor of the United States. That is not being referred to in the negotiations at all, or by President Trump when he accuses India. Yesterday he used a very strong word, saying the non-tariff barriers are obnoxious or obnoxiously high. And I'll also just like to say one other thing, that yes, there is a tariff differential. India was levying 13.2% average, what is the average rate of tariff on the goods imported from the US, and the US was levying 3% on us. So there was a 10% differential. That is the one which is being sought to be narrowed down in the 5 rounds of negotiations.
Dr. Jua, I'm very sorry. I am very conscious of time. You are staying with us to discuss more updates. Now, directly to the United States, where the US Federal Reserve has decided to leave interest rates unchanged, holding the benchmark range at 4.25% to 4.5%. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell emphasized that the economy remains strong, with low unemployment and inflation slightly above the 2% target. Powell also stated that the FED is closely monitoring data, especially the impact of President Trump's trade policies. Despite pressure from Trump to cut rates, Powell insisted the central bank remains focused on controlling inflation and will assess future actions based on incoming data. The decision comes after a 9-2 vote, marking divisions within the FED. Let's have a look at what the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell had to say on the issue.
At today's meeting, the committee decided to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate at 4.25% to 4.5%, and to continue reducing the size of our balance sheet. So, as you know, today we decided to leave our policy rate where it's been, where I would characterize as modestly restrictive. Inflation is running a bit above 2%, as I mentioned, even excluding tariff effects. The labor market's solid, historically low unemployment. financial conditions are accommodative, and the economy is not performing as though restrictive policy were holding it back inappropriately. So it seems to me and to almost the whole committee that the economy is not performing as though restrictive policy is holding it back inappropriately, and modestly restrictive policy seems appropriate. I will say we had a nice visit with the president. It was an honor to host him. It's not something that happens very often at the Federal Reserve to have the president come over, let alone to visit a building. But it was a good visit.
We're once again joined by Dr. Dewar. The US Federal Reserve has decided to leave interest rates unchanged, despite the President of the United States' criticism. What is the implications of this?
As Mr. Jerome Powell just mentioned in the corporate, we heard him just now in the press conference. I think there is cautious optimism in the Fed about the future of the U.S. Though the rate of growth in the economy has come down from last year's 2.5% to 1.3% this year, and the inflation has gone beyond what was sought by the Fed, beyond 2% to 2.5%. The governor and the Monetary Policy Committee has said that we think that the economy is strong enough. It does not need any further adjustment in the interest rates. Last year, it may be recalled that the rate was reduced by thrice the rate was reduced in the US. But this year, for last 5 meetings, they've held the rate at, say, 4.3% roughly. And it is felt that this is good, but at the same time, the governor has not ruled out the possibility that if there be optimism, and he's also pointed out that the household consumer spending in the US has come down, and the expenditure on the housing front, the capital expenditure, has declined in recent years. Both these are important factors for stability in the economy and its growth. So I think the experts, and the Fed does consist of people who are experts, it should be left to them to decide whether any further tinkering is needed or not. Mr. Powell was at pains to twice use the word accommodative, saying our stance in dealing with the issue is accommodative, which means if it is required, we shall reduce the rates and take other measures to infuse liquidity into the economy. There are two ways of putting money into the economy. One, reducing rates. The second is asking the banks to hold less of reserves with them compared to their deposits. And the option of using one or the two together is invariably with the central banks of the world. And I'm sure in the US, we are seeing a degree of optimism because with increased revenue is expected from tariffs which are being imposed virtually across the world. There would be a little bit of dilution in the huge debt which the US has on its books compared to the GDP. It's very large, one of the largest. And if that also is kind of managed through higher revenues, even better. So there may be an option for the governor or the chairman, as they call him, to reduce the rates a bit more than what they are currently.
Dr. Ajay Dewar, pleasure to have you on the program as always. We now move on and over to the Americas, where at least 7 people have been killed and several others injured after an unidentified gunman opened fire at a funeral in Guatemala City. Police and firefighters are now examining the crime scene. The incident is reportedly linked to gang violence. The region is also plagued by the violent rivalry between the Barrio 18 and the Mara Salvatrucha gangs. The Interior Minister Francisco Jimenez has blamed these gangs as the cause of the incident. Reports from the region says that armed men stormed a funeral home of a barrio member who was killed in Guatemala. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.